Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda. There's a shorty version.
No. Someone called me today and said, you and David's kind of getting really out there with his hello, Rhondas. And welcome everyone to episode 248. Today we're going to do another Ask David series. We've got some really great questions that I think everyone's going to really love. And I thought I would start off with reading a couple of the endorsements that we got from episodes 240 and 241, which was when Elizabeth shared how terrified she was and how much peace she wanted. And those are two very moving podcasts. Got a lot of feedback about them. One woman wrote, "Wow, Elizabeth, God bless you. It is hard to describe how much I relate to and appreciate the things you shared. What a godsend. As you began to talk about what feels like a daily struggle, boy, did that hit home. And it's this feeling of wanting to get off this hamster wheel of having to fight for survival. I do a lot of personal work with CBT, but I still struggle with this feeling a lot. Thank you to you, David and Jill, and everyone involved in making this kind of personal work available. It is so needed. And candidly, part one is hopefully a start of understanding about how to make some headway on this for myself." And someone else wrote, "Elizabeth, it was so brave of you to share your feelings and thoughts. I felt so much love, warmth, and admiration for you when you were sharing your story. Thanks."
Those are beautiful comments. And when any of you people in our Tuesday group share your personal issues, your insides, it is so helpful and magical for people. And thank you, Elizabeth, and all of you who wrote in. I was also contacted by a man in Europe who was very moved by the Elizabeth podcast and had a similar story of his father, kind of dying in poverty due to some tremendous financial reversal when this fellow was a teenager. And we might have a chance to, in fact, we're going to try to record a session with him too. But his picture is very different from Elizabeth's, and we'll probably call the podcast "A Perfect Life," except for one thing. And this is a fellow who has just had incredible success, and everything in his life is perfect, except for the one thing that's missing. And so
that will be very intriguing to find that out.
Yeah. Now, I can't promise it, but we're going to, Alex and I are going to do the session next Tuesday, and we'll see how it goes. But
that is the brilliant Alex Clark.
Yep, that's right. The brilliant and handsome Alex Clark and the brilliant and beautiful Rhonda Borofsky.
Well, thank you. Oh, and the brilliant and very debonair David Burns.
Well, yeah, I was born ugly, but I feel better about myself. The older I get, the better I like the way I look. Huh?
How can you say that? You were born?
Well, I was skinny and I was cross-eyed and I wore these big glasses and I squinted in the sun, and every time I had my picture taken, my older sisters, who kind of hated me, I think, just would tease the heck out of me, and it was very uncomfortable.
So were you crying in all your pictures? You didn't smile?
Well, I did smile, but that was another thing. I had a crooked smile, so they were always teasing me about that, and I'd be squinting with this crooked smile. And I was skinny and awkward looking, and So I'm comforted now in my old age.
That's very endearing. Okay, well, let me ask you the first question that Kati asked you. And she wrote you, "Hi, David. I notice that in your live therapy sessions, the negative feelings of most of your patients are reduced all the way to 0%, and many become euphoric. I was wondering whether this somewhat contradicts the idea that our negative feelings are useful to us in some way." Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm finding myself stumped again temporarily by that question. It's such a cool question. People often do become euphoric, and I don't. When at the end of my sessions with them, and we had the live therapy workshop on Sunday, and Jill and I treated 2 more people with crushingly severe problems.
Well, that was Sunday, May 17th, and this is going to be published June 28th, so that was a month ago.
And they also became euphoric by the end, which is a great thing to see. But yes, negative feelings have many positive aspects. And one of the tools, as you know, Rhonda, that we use to melt away resistance is to help people see what's beautiful about them that's revealed by their negative feelings.
Right.
And then they decide to dial them down rather than to make them disappear entirely. But then once their defenses go down and their subconscious allows them to work on challenging the negative, distorted thoughts, often they do go all the way to 0. You don't need to worry about that, because I think everyone is entitled to spend some time in a kind of euphoric enlightenment. And that's, the Dalai Lama says is one of the goals of life is to feel real joy and pleasure and happiness. And I agree with that. I think anyone would agree with that. But you don't need to worry about getting too happy, because no one can be happy all the time, and those negative feelings will always come back to haunt you, and then you have a chance to use your tools again. And just because negative feelings have wisdom and are teaching us things, that doesn't mean we have to have negative feelings all the time, and that we're not allowed to have the excursions into feelings of tremendous pleasure and joy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I really answered the question. What would be your thoughts about it?
Well, I think once some people can see what their negative thoughts say about them, that is really awesome, and how they are advantageous to them in some ways, then it's easier to give them up.
Yeah.
They don't need to cling on to them, because now with that understanding, they can say, well, maybe I could get that in some other way, or maybe I don't need quite so much of it.
Yeah.
And those moments of euphoria come when you realize that you don't need them in that moment, even if you do understand why they are around.
Yeah. One of the problems we're running into in the app, and I'm going to have to change the tone of the app a little bit, is when I talk about these experiences that I have all the time of people recovering really quickly. Some people kind of get mad at me, or they don't believe it, or they think I'm a con artist or something like that, or they get their hopes up, and then they get real disappointed if they don't have that immediate experience. And so I've been learning a lot about tone and toning things down and coming across in a more humble way, so as not to mislead or hurt people or offend people. I've been hurting quite a bit because of noticing how sometimes I get so excited about things, and then I don't take into account how someone else might perceive what I'm saying, or an unintended negative consequence of what I'm thinking of as something really positive and wonderful.
Well, I'm thinking about the times when you and I have done personal work in the Tuesday group, or even on the podcast. And in those moments when you get that light bulb go off, where you realize, I can let go of this negative thought. I understand it. I see how it's advantageous of me. I can dial it down. And then when you start challenging it, doing the various techniques and methods, and you can see how the negative thoughts that are really driving your, their depression or your sadness or insecurity, you don't need to hang on to them, and you let them go and you challenge them fully. That is a euphoric moment.
Yeah, it is.
And then, over time, sometimes they come back. They probably don't come back as strong as they did before you did the personal work. But then they don't have as much, like power or fire.
Right. Right.
Like we were just talking about Alex Clark doing this work with you and the fellow in Wales. And when I was telling you that when we originally started this podcast together, before we did the personal work on, am I good enough to do the podcast with you? If you had told me that Alex Clark was going to do this personal work with you and this fellow as your he would be your partner, I would have gone into a major depression or freaked out with my insecurity and thought, oh, David doesn't like me. David likes Alex better than me.
Yeah.
And I would have gone into a panic and gotten all distracted. But this time when you told that to me, you and Alex are going to do this, I just thought, yahoo, Alex is awesome.
Yeah,
we'll have a great experience with you.
Yeah.
And it'll be so fun for the two of you.
The death of the ego is just rocks.
Yeah.
It's more than just a reduction in depression. What we're trying to offer people, it is a kind of an enlightenment. But then when you say that, people think, oh, that burns. He really sucks. What a con artist.
But it's kind of something that you have to experience, maybe.
Yeah, you have to experience it, kind of like seeing the Grand Canyon. Until you've been there and seen it in person, it's hard to grasp what it's really like.
Yeah, I like that. This is the Grand Canyon of therapy.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, Kati asked you another question. Do you think empathy can be taught? She gave this example as the mother of a 15 and 10-year-old girls and a high school teacher. I noticed some people seem to have more empathy innately than others, but would also love to think it's an aspect that can be intentionally developed in others in some way. If you think like me, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that could be done. That is, what practices or strategies would be most helpful to use with young people in particular, teaching them how to be more empathic.
You didn't read the last paragraph.
Oh, is that?
You don't want to cut her short. Okay. Okay, you had other things to say.
Okay, here's what else Kati said. Sometimes you want me to edit the long ones I didn't. She wrote, I'm still in awe that we can have a sort of conversation with such a brilliant and creative mind. And I humbly hope you can address these two questions either in one of your podcasts or by responding to this message. In admiration, Kati.
Right. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Kati. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad I read that.
Yeah. This is such a great question, and I'm sure you have a lot of ideas about it, too, because you're always teaching empathy in various settings, and some of them very difficult, by the way. But the short answer to it is, yes, that empathy can be taught, and we've developed a lot of empathy teaching methods, including my book, Feeling Good Together, which one can read and learn all about the 5 secrets of effective communication and do the written exercises. And there's also exercises you can practice with others. I started out with really poor empathy skills. I think I've always been a difficult person to relate to. My parents told me that even when I was a child. And I think it's true today for sure. I think so many people can't stand me, and recently I've been suddenly realizing why. It's kind of a shocker.
Oh my God.
but yes, and but I taught myself. I was inspired by my student Sterling Morey, who sat in with me in the early days of my practice for a month. He was a medical student from London, and he had such beautiful interpersonal skills. And I said, boy, if I could learn to be half as good as Sterling, it would be great. And then I developed a system for teaching myself. And if you go to the website, feelinggood.com, and go to the search and type in 5 secrets of effective communication, you'll find a lot of podcasts that I did with Fabrice and that I've done with Rhonda on that very, very topic. I'll make one other quick comment and then shut up. There's more, though, than just, methods and teaching. There has to be a motivation to learn to increase your empathy skills and your communication skills. And I believe that half of the world would not wish to do that. We've kind of got the warlike side of human nature and then the loving and tenderness side of human nature. And people who are into that warlike, aggressive side want to kick ass. and they don't want to understand another person's thoughts and feelings and point of view. And compassion is kind of the same as wimpiness to some people. So first, you've got to have the motivation, and some of that might be genetic, actually. And in addition, I'm sure there's a genetic aptitude for empathy, like anything else. Some people would be born with a high aptitude, probably like Matt May or Jill Levitt, but they also practiced growing up, and that helped them as well. But even if your aptitude is poor, like, or for whatever reason, or maybe had a damaged childhood or something, even if you start from a very low level and you're determined to develop improved empathy skills, you can, and your degree of improvement can kind of keep going on forever. And with that, I'll shut up and give your take on it, because I know you've taught 5 secrets to police officers and all kinds of people, and that you work in the court system with some of the most severely damaged families and the most hostile, troubled couples, and you're assigned by the courts to work with these people. So what does Rhonda have to say? Can empathy be taught?
I think empathy can be taught. I think a lot of people don't have a large vocabulary for feelings. And I think one of the tools that you've created, that list of feelings, that color-coded list, and how you've broken them out into clusters, has really, honestly, it's so simple, but it's really been helpful for people to be able to look at that and I'd say, oh yeah, that is a feeling, and be able to reflect back. It is actually hard to put yourself in somebody else's life and situation and imagine what they're feeling. And it takes practice. Actually, it was Jill Levitt who has taught me the most about how to really imagine what another person is feeling.
She might be the best at that of anybody, do you think?
I think she is.
Yeah, she's just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, she's amazing. But, even when you're outside of a therapy office, when we talk about giving homework, just wherever you are in whatever situation, imagining what that person is feeling is really helpful. Like you said, you did it yourself when you just wander around, or you're even watching TV, you can imagine what the newscaster's thinking, or a character on the show is thinking, or if you're in customer service, you can imagine what one of your customers is feeling, or so that's a little distant and you're not emotionally attached to it. And then imagine what people in your life are feeling in various situations. It's just something that takes practice.
Yeah, right. And I think people don't know, too, that your ideas about what other people are thinking and feeling will virtually always be radically incorrect. That our ideas about where someone is coming from, that's our own manufactured thing. And if you have actual data, like you measure their feelings, and like in experiments I've done that I've referred to, and you can find out exactly what someone's feeling, and then what the therapist thinks they're feeling, or a loved one thinks they're feeling. And there's usually a huge disconnection between what people are feeling and what you think. And a lot of our anger and difficulty in relationships because of what we attribute people's motives and what they're thinking, rather than what's really going on. And
that's a really good point, and that's why if embedded in the 5 secrets is the question: am I getting that right? Is that is that how you're feeling? Tell me more. Yeah. Because you really want to make sure that you're on the same page as the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that you've got to have the desire, and you've got to put the willingness to practice. Then you have to have the exact exercises to practice with, to learn. Just like in piano, there are certain exercises that you have to do first, and then you can learn to make chords or play songs and that type of thing. And one of the best exercises that we do, that we've demonstrated so often on the show, let me just say, I won't demonstrate that again because we've done it so many times, but yes, you can teach kids empathy. And that is the time, Kati, to start with your kids, 15 and 10-year-old girls. And we had that mother-daughter thing recently. And I looked that up. That's one of our most popular podcasts ever, by the way.
Makes sense.
And but yes, I taught my daughter the 5 secrets of effective communication when she was a high school freshman. And it transformed her social life, both with boys as well as with friends in general. And that's a great time to teach them. But again, you've got to have a relationship with your kids that they want to learn from you, and then you have to know how to do it yourself. Otherwise, you can't teach them how to do it. There's plenty of practice exercises in the book Feeling Good Together.
I taught somebody who was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle group, and I taught this really tough, not to stereotype, but a construction worker. And both of those were men, and they both said, "We don't talk about our feelings."
Yeah.
I said, well, just practice this. This is your homework, and you have a goal in mind, and to reach your goal, you have to start identifying your feelings and see if you can figure out what other people feel. And so all day for a week, I had them, whoever they were interacting with at work or in their recreation, imagine what they were feeling. And they said they got the funniest responses, but they learned. And
that's cool.
And it really helped them.
That's really awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. I didn't know you had that connection with the Hells Angels.
Yeah. They have feelings too.
There's a good expression you can use when training the Hells Angels.
Oh, what's that?
You acknowledge my feelings, dude, or I'm going to kick your ass.
Yeah. That'll be the 6th secret. Well, here's a question from Yiftah. And he wrote, or she, how could one dangle the carrot effectively and responsibly when offering a cognitive exposure exercise? Dear Dr. Burns, I love your podcast and books. They've completely changed my practice and helped me personally. In particular, it was great to hear you working with Dr. Levitt with cognitive exposure and your discussion about it. I have 2 questions regarding cognitive exposure with PTSD. First, how could one dangle the carrot effectively and responsibly when offering the cognitive exposure exercise?
Right. Well, I'll say what I would say to a patient, and you can tell me how you handle it, but there's outcome resistance and process resistance. And we'll go over those in group tonight, by the way.
Oh, good.
But the outcome resistance is that the patient with PTSD or any form of anxiety wants to get rid of the anxiety, but is afraid that something terrible will happen if the anxiety disappears, that somehow the anxiety is protecting you from an even worse fate, and that if you worry enough, you'll be safe. And so that has to be addressed. And that's the outcome resistance, the ambivalence about whether or not I really want to get better. And a simple way to do that is to have them list all of the benefits of their anxiety and what it shows about them that's positive and awesome. And you can generally come up with quite a long list, and then say, given all those advantages and benefits, say, sure, I've got tools to help you overcome your anxiety, but maybe that's not something we should be doing. Maybe that's not such a good idea. What do you think? Because look at how all the awful things that might happen if you got over your anxiety. And then once you cross that bridge and the patient decides, yes, I would be willing to get over the anxiety, then I might deal with the process resistance. And the way I would say it was, I have a lot of tools and techniques to help you with anxiety. I probably have more than 30 anti-anxiety techniques, and we won't need all of them. But I want you to know that you're going to love all of them. They're really fun. They're not threatening in any way, except for one. And that's exposure. And it's going to have to be a part of our treatment plan. And you're going to have to confront the thing you fear the most if you want me to work with you. And I'll be there with you. I'll be with you every step of the way. But you're going to have to go to the gates of hell and confront the monster that you've been running away from. And then I tell them the kind of exposure that they will likely have to do. like maybe they had a traumatic event in the war, and I'd ask you to imagine that and make yourself as anxious as possible. Or let's say they have obsessive compulsive disorder with contamination of germs and things, then I'd say we'd have to go out, and I'll show a video of this in group tonight, and put our hands in that dirty container outside of the behavioral sciences building. You'd have to touch toilets tonight together. We can go in and touch toilet seats together. That's a common technique that therapists use. That was an attempt at humor. But we did, you know.
I was just thinking that's what's going to have to happen.
I was wondering if you were listening.
Yeah. I was kind of nodding, going, "Yep, that's what we're going to do." Yep.
And if you're willing to do this exposure, it'll be almost impossible for us to fail. And if you're not comfortable using exposure, then it would be pretty much impossible for me to cure you. And so what I want to know is, if I agree to work with you, would you be willing to do the exposure? And that's called the gentle ultimatum. And then the sitting with open hands is if the person says, "No, I'm not sure that I'm willing to do that," then say, "Well, maybe you need to go to another on the screen."
Okay.
You're back now. Did you record what I just said?
Yeah.
Okay, because you were frozen there for about.
You were frozen too, and but your voice was still going.
Oh, good, great.
So
beautiful. Great.
I probably didn't. You were talking about the gentle ultimatum. So. Yeah.
So anyway, I just modeled how to issue.
Wait. I didn't get the model, so let's do that again. Oh, am I modeling it? Oops. Okay, let's start over. 1, 2, Josh, we're starting over. Okay.
Where are we going to start over on?
Let's start with you modeling the gentle ultimatum.
Okay, great.
Sorry, you guys, we had a little break in our technology. David's going to model how to issue a gentle ultimatum again.
Okay. 5,
4, 3, 2.
That would have been good silence if you hadn't been counting. But that's okay. I'll just jump in because the laughter people will like. But I might say to the patient, Jim, I'd really love to work with you on your anxiety, whether it's social anxiety or PTSD or OCD or whatever it happens to be. And I've got a good 20 or 30 or more techniques to help you get over that. And we're not going to need all of those techniques, but I do have a tremendous amount of firepower available. And you're going to love all the techniques that I have to offer you, like the hidden emotion technique and identify the distortions and all kinds of downward arrow, the what if technique. But there's one technique you're going to absolutely hate, and that's exposure. And that's going to have to be a part of our treatment package together, because it's impossible for me to cure you without exposure. The exposure alone probably won't be enough, but it must be a part of what we do. And then I would explain, here's the kind of exposure I'd ask you to do. Like if they have a germ phobia, we would be, touching really grimy things together with our hands, things that you're afraid to do, and it'll freak you out. Or if you're afraid of making a fool of yourself in public, maybe you have social anxiety, then we might go out together doing shame attacking exercises and make fools of ourselves in public or whatever. And if you're willing to do that, and I know it'll freak you out. I know I've had all kinds of anxiety myself, so I know how frightening the exposure can be. And if you're willing to do it, there's little chance that we will fail. But if you're unwilling to do it, there's no chance that we'll be successful. Mm. And so I want to know, if I agreed to accept you as my patient, would you be willing to do the exposure along with these other techniques that'll be fun and not scary? And that's called the gentle ultimatum. And then if he says, yes, I'm willing to do that, I say, let's go for it. That's fantastic. And if the patient says, well, no, I'm not ready for exposure. I want to talk about my childhood or whatever, then I would say, well, then I'm not the therapist for you. And there's tons of community shrinks who also don't believe in exposure, and you can go to any of them, and if it doesn't work out, my door is always open to you, and you can come back any time, and that's called sitting with open hands. So that's how I would issue the gentle ultimatum.
And what you said in the beginning, he had asked you about dangling the carrot. You do dangle the carrot before you issue the gentle ultimatum. Yeah,
that might have been cut out too, because I would start by saying, I have no doubt if we work together, we will be effective. I can't guarantee it, but in my mind, it's practically a certainty. However, there's this one technique that I have to tell you that we'll use. And again, exposure is not a cure or a treatment for anxiety or anything. It's just a tool. But it has to be one of the tools that we'll use. Well,
the only thing I add, of course, I don't say it quite as eloquently as you just did, but I say to my patients that, going through exposure and getting to the other side of facing the monster will provide them with a sense of freedom and peace that they might not have before.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fantastic thing.
Okay,
it's another form of enlightenment.
Yep, absolutely. Well, yeah. So Yiftah also asked, from your experience, can you give examples of cases in which cognitive exposure may not be as safe or as effective?
Yeah, and if you read the first paragraph, too, of his question on
you have a lot of experience with successful exposure treatments, but I have never worked with PTSD. And I hear some PTSD, which, as most people know, or maybe some people don't, stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So he writes, when I hear some PTSD experts say that cognitive exposure is a dangerous process that can backfire, and according to papers I've read, it doesn't always help.
Well, that's a great question. And let me just, to make a long story short.
No, that's not possible.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
Shut up, David. Well, anyway, that's my answer.
Okay.
There are some patients. If every technique has to be done thoughtfully, rather than according to some treatment manual. And let's say I'm going to do cognitive exposure and have somebody fantasize something really horrible. Like once I had a woman fantasize people torturing her baby to death. And it sounds horrible, but I tried 50 techniques that didn't work. And she kept thinking maybe someone would steal her baby, or the babies might have got switched at the hospital, and these bad people got her baby, and she had the wrong baby. And she kept checking her baby. It was severe OCD, and nothing else worked. And finally, what is it you're afraid of? And then this was her fear. And we sat for 2.5 hours while she fantasized the most excruciating torture. Before it finally broke, and then suddenly her anxiety disappeared, and she realized that this was her baby, and she was cured. But it was very very frightening. But I knew that I could trust her, and I got perfect empathy from her, and she was a good egg. So she trusted me, and I trusted her. Now let's say. Wait,
can I ask? And you trusted yourself.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. Well, I always trust myself with when it comes to exposure. It's not my fear there, right. But a lot of therapists are afraid of it. But now let's say I'm treating someone who's living in the woods, a homeless person, who has a submachine gun, an automatic rifle, and is paranoid, and is wandering around in some paranoid state, and he's afraid he's going to lose it and go to the local mall and blow people away, and this makes him anxious. I wouldn't have him fantasize going to the mall and blowing people away if he doesn't have good impulse control. Now you're playing with fire, and then I can imagine the next morning, on TV, local man blows away 8 people in the mall. When police arrested him, they say, "Oh, that Dr. Burns had me practice this yesterday. He's feeling good, doctor."
Yeah.
It's the type of thing. So you always have to be a little bit careful. But all that being said, I don't think Jill or I have ever had a bad experience with any form of exposure for PTSD or anything else. But, you see, we always do empathy first, testing, and then empathy, and then assessment of resistance. We don't just throw exposure at someone. And I suspect a lot of these experts who say, "Oh, this is very dangerous," and things like that, I suspect that very few of them have good empathy skills. But, you know, and the reason I say that would may be unfair, but almost no therapists are measuring their empathy during sessions. And once they start measuring, they find out they're failing with most of their patients on the empathy dimension. And unless you're getting a perfect empathy scores, I wouldn't even begin to think of using exposure. That trust is so important. I've had 17 anxiety disorders myself, so I know how important trust is when it comes to confronting your fears. And so that's and so I think the side effects of any therapy come from it not being done with skill and compassion, not from the technique itself. And I think those experts are doing a huge disservice by discouraging therapists from using exposure, thinking it's too dangerous. I would say that sounds delusional to me, or inept at the very least. And the final thing that I wanted to say, if I can say it before I forget it, because I already forgot it, was very important.
Well, can I say?
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
You know, the reason I said you have to trust yourself too is when therapists, I'm on another listserv that has nothing to do with team therapy.
Yeah.
And there was something that went around saying that somebody asked a question about exposure, and someone said, "Oh, nobody does exposure anymore. That's been debunked." Yeah. And I think that when therapists don't trust their skills or don't trust this technique, they say, "Well, I guess I'll try it." Then because they've read a papers, they went to training, because they feel anxious. The anxiety might be generalized toward their patient. And then, that also could lead to failure of the exposure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's so much inept therapy going around. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but I just believe it, and so strongly. And then the other thing that I thought was outrageous, I've read papers to read it doesn't always help. Well, we shouldn't use techniques that don't always help. What are those techniques that always help, Rhonda?
Well, we don't know yet because everybody is different. So some techniques would work with some person and might not work with another person.
Oh, so you're saying all techniques don't always help?
Yeah.
So if we follow these experts that you're not supposed to use a technique that doesn't always help, then you're not allowed to use any techniques.
You're right.
All techniques fail a good bit of the time.
Yeah.
And so it's just, to me, a stupid statement. I don't mean that you are stupid. I think these are brilliant and fantastic questions. But these kinds of people going around spouting off, sounding like gurus, thinking they know everything, I can't stand those people, although I am one of them myself. But yeah, and I would never treat someone with exposure. I use 4 treatment models, and I have 30 or 40 techniques, and I treat people with many techniques. Exposure is just part of an individualized treatment package. I think our way of doing therapy is just radically different from the way the rest of the field is responding. So anyway, I love those questions.
Okay, well, let me ask you Esther's question.
Yeah.
And
she's got a tough question. Esther's identity is disguised a little bit too.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because she has an implied criticism of her supervisor, who's psychodynamic, and she didn't want to hurt her supervisor's feelings.
Okay. So she wrote, "Hi, David. I absolutely love your stuff. I've used some parts of Feeling Good in my practice as a therapist and in my personal life for some time, but I've recently gotten much more into your teachings, and I've been thinking a lot about team. And thank you for providing all these free resources for the public. In episode 230, about 20 minutes in, Rhonda asks you about a common psychodynamic type of claim. it was kind of a joke. I remember that. It was sort of a joke. But I said, a child of alcoholics either becomes an alcoholic, marries an alcoholic, or becomes a therapist of an alcoholic. And you
or an alcoholic therapist.
Right. To expand on the joke. So you responded by saying, oh, people love those kinds of theories because people want to think they know the causes of things. And then you went on to disagree, claiming there isn't much evidence to support these types of claims. And yet what you said still resonates with me and highlights the crux of my question. Isn't there any value in intuition without any evidence in determining the causes of things? This is kind of jumping around. This is not just a theoretical question for me. I currently work under a wonderful supervisor who takes a psychodynamic approach to many issues, and I'm very suspicious of some of his theories, but it seems that he is a great therapist. Further, I think that many people in school and early stages of practice, including myself, are conflicted about whether or not they wish to train further in evidence-based approaches or in a psychodynamic type of school.
Well, in TEAM, in the methods part of TEAM, we use 50 or 100 techniques, really, from a dozen or more schools of therapy. And there are some techniques I've developed that do have psychodynamic roots, like the interpersonal downward arrow technique, the individual downward arrow technique, the hidden emotion technique, and
changing
more.
The focus.
Yeah, changing the focus, that's another, good. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that. And in addition, there is a lot of room for intuition, and most of the time what we're doing doesn't yet have any good empirical basis. We're in a pre-scientific era, really, in psychotherapy and the behavioral sciences, and I'm trying to turn it into more of a science with measurement at the start and end of sessions and measuring empathy and things like that. Where I get kind of bugged is when people take their interpretations as facts rather than hypotheses. And I also get impatient with people who don't realize that all of your hypotheses are probably going to be wrong. Mm. That all the theories we make up with our individual patients or in general, what causes of depression and things due to childhood and whatever are likely wrong. And I got a good shot of this from Albert Ellis, the man who created rational emotive behavior therapy, really one of the early cognitive therapists who proposed a lot of these things before Beck, really. Everyone kind of sees perfectionism as, being so important. I wrote an article on perfectionism for Psychology Today magazine. It was the most popular article ever to appear in that magazine at the time it appeared, at any rate. But the thinking is that, perfectionism, we see it all the time in our patients. Beating up on yourself because you're not smart enough, you're not good enough, and almost everybody does that who's depressed or anxious, and then you can trace it, to growing up in an unloving household where you were rated, on your grades, and if you got a B on your report card, it's, well, why didn't you get all A's, and things like that, and so people really think, oh boy, this is a childhood experience. But once Albert Ellis said, well, perfectionism is incredibly common, and it's probably 100% genetic. Mm. You're probably a perfectionist the moment you're born or not. And I thought, the guy's got a great point there. There's probably huge contributions of genes. And so just because something seems, true, it doesn't make it true. And I don't mind people throwing out theories, but when they throw out theories as facts, that kind of ticks me off. A Jungian analyst drove me to the airport following a workshop, and he was a very neat guy, a really kind and friendly guy, and he said he loved the workshop. And he says, here's the one thing I didn't get about your workshop. You've got all of these techniques to change the way people think and feel so they can overcome depression really fast now. But why don't you teach them about the causes of depression? Isn't that a big thing lacking in your therapy? And I said, it's intentionally lacking, because anyone who thinks they know the causes of depression is just full of shit. The causes of depression are 100% unknown. All we can say at this time is that every current theory can be shown to be false. We don't know the cause of depression or anxiety. But people like to think they know the causes. Now, one thing I do, I test theories all the time with structural equation modeling techniques, and people bring their data to my house, and, you know, professors and graduate students, and they say, oh, I understand you do this cool structural equation modeling. I'd like help analyzing my data, and then I tell them, okay, but the thing is, if you give me your data, we'll put it in a computer, I'll create a mathematical model that exactly reflects your hypothesis. But I can tell you right now that the computer is going to come up with a conclusion that your theory cannot be true. I've never seen that not happen when people brought their data and their beloved theory to my house. Is that okay with you? And they all say, oh, that's fine. I just want to follow the truth. I just want to see what the data shows. So I say, okay. And then they come down to where I am right now. We have this big screen, and I plug the data into my computer, and I create a beautiful pictorial model. It's a multi-equation model that perfectly reflects their hypothesis, and then we run it. And the computer does billions of calculations to see if their theory is correct. And then the computer comes back with the conclusion, the likelihood that this theory is valid is less than 1 in a trillion.
Wow.
It's total, cannot fit this data. And then I say to the person, this is great news. We've just proven that your theory is totally fraudulent and false.
No, who wants to?
And I can write that. I said, negative feelings are so important. That's how science moves forward, to realize that what we believe isn't true. Then we can get to what the truth is. And I say, I can write up the material and methods for your paper in about 2 hours. You can write up the introduction, and we can get something submitted to one of the top journals within 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
You know how many of them have moved forward?
Zero.
It's never once happened. And that's what I mean. People want to believe what they want to believe. And I love doing mathematical modeling, because the computer, if you're patient, it'll eventually tell you where your theory screwed up, and then you can, modify your thinking. So that's kind of my point of view. And so people who are psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, they have theories that to them are like a religion sometimes. And they I don't want to be overly critical, but that's the way a lot of them are. It's like a cult. And they said Freud said it, so it must be true. But what the Buddha said about Freud 2,500 years ago?
What was that?
He said he's full of shit. And he was. He was just a bullshitter who used cocaine. And he came up with this model that kind of got people thinking about the brain, but id, ego, and superego, there isn't any such thing, and it's not a useful model, and it never bore a whole lot of fruit except in poetry and novels and movies and that type of thing. But a science, I'm in favor of a science of psychotherapy, and I'm convinced it is evolving now and will evolve and will massively change the field. But when someday they'll look back on the theories of this era and just they'll laugh at it, just like we laugh at the ridiculous theories people had 1,000 years ago. And I'm just saying that that's the way things are. We do not know the causes of things. If you go around telling people, oh, this is the cause of this is the cause of that, then, I don't have a lot of time for you.
Cool. Okay.
That's just another narcissistic guru spouting things.
But also, does it matter? I mean, that's sort of what I ask. Does it matter the cause if you can reach a place of challenging and
not from a treatment point of view,
and get to a place of, like I said, freedom and peace and feeling better and euphoria, enlightenment? Who cares?
Yeah, it's kind of neat not to know the causes of things. Yeah, I love that, Rhonda.
Okay, we have time for one more.
Okay, well, Sean has
this is Sean.
Cool one.
And he wrote, "Dear Dr. Burns, what can you do when you're using the disarming technique and the person keeps interrupting you? I've recently been practicing the 5 secrets, and I'm still learning how to apply the techniques. I've listened to many podcasts, and I'm reading your books and doing the exercises. I'm a complete believer in your method. During disarming technique, if the person continues to aggressively interrupt and ask pointed questions, how do I continue to stay engaged in the conversation? I repeat that.
I'll make this a super quick answer, and then we'll get to do the last question, too, and I'll make that one super quick. The answer is that that'll never happen, Brian, if you're using the five secrets of Sean. Yeah, Sean. If you're using the five secrets skillfully, and you're not. And if you'll just send me an example of one thing the other person said and exactly what you said next, and you thought you were using the disarming technique, I'll be able to show you why the other person kept attacking you or whatever they were doing, what you did wrong, and how to do it differently. And that's where all the learning occurs, never on this abstract level of, why is people doing this and why is people doing that? Well, it's because you're forcing them to do what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And if you do, here's one thing they said, here's what I said next, and then we'll look at, you'll see you didn't empathize, you didn't share your feelings, you didn't stroke, and then show you how to do that. And then my last point, sadly, I never heard from Sean. Often when I ask people, let's look at your role, then I never hear from them again. And that's disappointing.
That's sad
to me. Yeah.
Maybe Sean's going to listen to this podcast, and so if you are Sean, we're inviting you to send David a specific conversation.
Yeah. Just all I need is one thing the other person said, and exactly what you said, that you thought you were using the five secrets and it didn't work, and then that simple example can have a life-changing effect.
Okay, well then we have great practice being succinct, David.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ben asked, here's a summary of what his question is. Since exercise improves the mood of some people who are feeling down, doesn't it prove that exercises improves the mood of people who are feeling down?
Yeah, something like that. I think I have a typo here in his question, but he's saying that shows that physical things like endorphins,
right, a vigorous session of exercise,
mood, and it isn't all, that proves that cognitive therapy is kind of wrong.
Oh,
that was his.
It's one or the other.
Yeah, that exercise can affect mood. Then it isn't all your thoughts.
Oh,
And this is, again, one of those horseshit things where people think they know something that they don't know. Do you see? How would we know? See, first of all, I've always said that the whole endorphin theory of exercise is horseshit.
Well, I'd have to disagree with you.
And the reason for that is because endorphins can't be measured in the human brain. And so there'd be no way to test it. Recently, they did figure a way to test it. They blocked endorphins in the human brain. There's some medication you can give that blocks endorphins. And then they had people exercise and had the same effect on mood. So it was ultimate proof of what I've been saying for a long time, that this was just another horseshit theory that people were believing because they wanted to believe it, but it was factually incorrect. Now, Ben is saying, isn't it also true that that this shows that you can affect mood without affecting negative thoughts? And I said, think about it, Ben. You're just assuming something you haven't tested. Have you ever tested changes in thoughts during exercise? How do we know it's not thoughts? I believe it is thoughts because I exercise strenuously. It never did a bit of good for me, because I don't have any positive thoughts afterwards. But if you're thinking, oh, I did a good thing for myself, this is healthy, I'm going to live long, I'm going to have energy, I'm a good guy, I'm following my plan, those thoughts will make you feel good.
I love that distinction.
Isn't that cool?
That is so cool.
And we had that recently also. We had a most beautiful person, I won't mention his name, but I probably should because I admire him so much, but he's a top grief expert, come to the Tuesday group and did a kind of a demonstration of how you can help people with grief problems. And our beloved Lee, who you know, was his did the personal work, and he had her picture the color of her emotions, and are they fuzzy and black and stuff like that, kind of a hypnoidal gestalt kind of thing. And he did it beautifully, and she found it very beneficial, and she was grieving the loss of her husband in divorce and the death of her father. And then she'd been hung up on those things, and it was very helpful to her. And he thought his, gestalt thing did it. But then I asked her afterwards, did she have any change in her negative thoughts? And she said, oh, absolutely. So again, you see, the mechanism is, I believe, and I'll present this in our group tonight, that it's impossible to change negative feelings without a reduction in the negative thoughts that cause them, and that this is a new unifying hypothesis for the behavioral sciences, for psychotherapy, and for how human emotions change. And I believe that all therapeutic interventions can only help depression or anxiety if they change negative thoughts, including mindfulness, meditation, EMDR, every form of therapy. That's impossible to help depression unless you change negative thoughts. And you can do it directly or indirectly. I think direct techniques are much faster.
All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
But that's a hypothesis, and it's testable. Yep. It can be disproven if it's not true.
Yes.
That's it.
Oh, okay. My head is spinning.
And I have a question for you, Rhonda.
Okay.
I was a tad more senile and outrageous today.
Well, you did swear a lot.
Yeah. Is that bad?
This has been banned, but...
Will I be punished? Is that okay?
You'll probably get some emails about it, but everything else was great.
Yeah, I loved working with you today.
Yeah, this
Rhonda.
was super fun.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you, David.
And thank you all for all those great questions. And remember, half of what I say is pure gold. And half is bullshit. And I don't know which half is which. It all sounds good to me. So use your own critical thinking when David talks.
I love that. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.